I'd just like to go around and ask each of our panelists specifics about what agency you're from, what your agency's mission is, and then also how you got involved. So Hillary, let's go ahead and start with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I work for the Division of Cultural Affairs. We were founded in 1969. We just had our 50th anniversary. And we were founded in response to the creation of the NEA. So each of the states has a state designated arts agency. And so we receive some funding that comes directly from the NEA. And then we also provide grants to arts and cultural institutions throughout the state, as well as some funding to individuals. And that funding is provided through the Florida legislature. So we have a granting program where you can apply, and then those funds are appropriated by the legislature. And I came to the Division of Cultural Affairs. I first came in 1999, I think. I was a grad student in the Arts Administration Master's program at Florida State. And I did an internship that grew into a program manager being on maternity leave. I took over her program, and I stayed there until 2001. And at that time, I went and did an internship at Tate Britain through the study abroad program. So once then I came back and moved away and worked, various other places in North Carolina. And then 10 years later, came back to Tallahassee and ended up working at the division. So back again and doing grants again.
Yeah, that's awesome. Lindsey, would you mind telling us about your experience?
Absolutely. Hello, all. My name is Lindsey Morrison, and I am the Grants Director here at Florida Humanities. If you had not heard of us before, Florida Humanities is the statewide nonprofit associated with the National Endowment for the Humanities. So every state has a Humanities Council. Alaska has one, Maryland has one, and we are Florida's. So our charge is to support statewide humanities programming. And how we do that is we give out $5,000 grants to support public humanities programming, which of course, many of you are probably familiar with the humanities. It's all those disciplines that help us understand our shared human experience based in analysis, interpretation, and scholarship. So we fund public humanities programming, how you are engaging the public with those humanities disciplines and fostering that aha moment that enables us to understand ourselves better and our neighbors better, which we could all use a little bit more of that this year, certainly. So that is what we are all about. How I came into it, I have been with Florida Humanities for 2 years now. I also have a degree from Florida State University. I graduated in the anthropology department with my undergrad, and then went on to go get my master's in Arizona in archaeology anthropology. And worked for 5 years in DC with the national nonprofit American Battlefield Trust in the preservation side, also in the grants sort of side of things before I came to Florida Humanities to be grants director. So happy to be here.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Erica Thaler with COCA.
Hello. It's nice to see so many people that I do know, and then I feel like a kid in a candy shop with all these participants that I hope to connect to and talk to y'all about marketing. But I am the marketing director, marketing manager at COCA. I have been there for, I think this is the beginning of my 12th year, and a lot of changes and growth with COCA. We are the local arts agency for Tallahassee, Leon County, but we also serve the 100-mile radius around Tallahassee, including little bits of Georgia and Alabama. We are a granting organization. We also receive grants. And currently I'm the grant manager on COCA's Cultural Tourism Marketing Grant. So I'm running that program as well. And, I'll share a little more about what COCA does as we move forward, but more about me. I actually was born in San Diego. The first part of my career was in commercial radio. I was basically an ad executive in commercial radio, moved to Tallahassee to own and operate a radio station here. So my background is broadcast and media sales. Got into the arts because when my kids were 3, someone said they should learn to play instruments. And now I have a 24-year-old, a 21-year-old doing their master's and undergraduate performance degrees in violin and viola. So I got really interested in that and became a real advocate for the arts and arts funding. I've also served as the board chair of the Tallahassee Bach Parley for 10 years, and we saw like growth of almost 1,000% in the time I was there. And then currently my volunteer activities are something called Music for Food. And I work actually with FSU on that, where we work with Second Harvest. We do concerts and all the money's given to the local food pantry here, local food bank Second Harvest. I'm also a quilter, and I have a little dog and a cat that are all over social media. Sorry for those of you that are friends with me.
Let's go ahead and dive in real quickly to some of the funding opportunities that your organizations are involved with.
As the state arts agency, like I said, we do offer funds that are appropriated through the legislature. So something that's a little bit tricky about our grants is because of that timeline of funding through the legislature, there is a 13-month gap between when you apply and when you receive your funds. And so what happens is if you're recommended for funding, you get on a list, and that list becomes part of our legislative budget request. And then that goes forward to the legislature, and then through appropriations, we find out how much money we get, and it goes that way. So that part is a little tricky, but we do have a program, and mostly, so both departments and individuals would be eligible for this, and it would be our specific cultural projects program. And I'm going to put the link in just a minute in the chat box. But so those are project grants. So we do offer programming for bigger organizations, but university departments and individuals are only eligible to get funding for projects. In the past, some examples, we have had Antonio Mendez Esparza, who is part of the film school, has had 2 film projects that have been funded through us. One was done before we had reinstated individual funding as a partnership through the actual film department. Then the second one was done through Antonio as an individual. We also funded Valerie Schoon in the last round, who is also a professor with the film school. She has done a documentary about slavery in Leon County. So those 2 examples just happen to be media arts, but we do fund in all what we call, the arts disciplines. So we have, literature, media arts, visual arts, music, theater, presenting, so there is a long list. We have traditional arts. Those are kind of specific just because it has to really be traditional, and we have folk life is actually coming back in under us organizationally, but we usually do kind of work with the folklorist as needed, because those are really specific. But if you were to have, so this would be a program, so it might be a lecture series, it might be an exhibition, it might be as an individual. We've had Ben Gunter, who is an adjunct professor with the theater department and also does theater with a mission. He's been funded, I think, 3 times, and back when we had fellowships was funded before. And his latest series that he's been doing are some historical plays that he does in the schools that are related to the Florida kind of 500 Viva Florida project thing. So, we do have a broad range of things that are funded, and those grants are up to $25,000. There is a matching requirement. So depending on if you come in with a department or you come in as an individual, and all that information is on our website and in the guidelines. And, if you have any direct questions, I would, suggest that you reach out, to me, and I'll be happy to talk you through it. The main thing is just to keep in mind anything that you're applying for is, what will they fund? What is it eligible to fund? And what is that timeline like? So if you're looking at multiple funders, if you, let's say you need equipment or travel, we don't fund those things. Those could be matching funds, but those aren't things that you can use state funds for. So I just recommend when people are looking at multiple funders that you be mindful of who kind of will cover what and where in the timeline of things those things will fit in.
So we offer $5,000 community project grants from Florida Humanities, like I talked about. We have a few other granting programs. So this program is most likely fit a lot of faculty at FSU. So we offer these grants to nonprofit organizations, universities and colleges and public institutions. But my strong recommendation would actually be to partner with a local nonprofit to complete a lot of your work. And I say that because $5,000 is not $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 that you may need to complete your project. And sometimes $5,000 gets stopped up, as I'm sure many of you know, in the university, kind of red tape situation. So for a small amount of money. So I would really suggest you partner with a local nonprofit to apply, but certainly we probably fund at least one university project each grant cycle. So it certainly feeds through. But what we fund, like I talked about in my introduction, is public humanities programming. So if I think many of the faculty on this call are with arts departments or museums, art museums and the like. So if you had, for example, an art exhibit and you wanted to bring in humanities scholars to have panel discussions or question and answer or generate community conversations on very relevant, timely issues, we could fund those scholars, their honoraria, their travel. If this is virtual, some of the technology involved in it, the promotion to your communities, underserved communities, those are the types of things that we could support. Unlike my colleagues on this call, we do not directly support the arts or performing arts. We would only fund the humanities programming that goes along with it, that complements it and kind of grounds it more deeply in analysis and interpretation. With that, I will say that our funding ratio is about 30%, which is, I think, fairly high considered, I guess, with the National Endowment for the Humanities, which I think theirs hovers around 9 or 10% or 11%, depending upon the program. So we see our grants as really gateway grants in the humanities to enable you to become more competitive or maybe have a better understanding about how to apply for humanities grants when you want to get that bigger grant with the National Endowment for the Humanities. And a plus side for applying with us or working with a nonprofit is that we are very happy to walk you through the entire process and answer calls, have Zoom calls and be really hand-holding throughout the entire process. So we are here to support the humanities and we don't want to make it difficult for anybody. So try to make it as transparent as possible.
So we have we have 3 grant programs. One is Arts and Education Grant, which is administered by my colleague Amanda Thompson, which are small, very small, like project for schools. We don't have an individual artist grant, something on our radar we know we would like to do. But the 2 like major grants basically are the Coca Cultural Grant and the Cultural Tourism Marketing Grant. Those funds are primarily fueled by TDT dollars, and this has been a really crazy year because COVID has made some, it's forced everybody to make some adjustments because the TDT collection is down. But we are still running that program. We normally have a more robust amount of funds to use, and this year was less. Everybody did get cut back, but we are still planning to move ahead with that grant program next year. That's in process, so you'll see that. I'm going to paste in here something about state partners because pasting in there right now. So FSU and universities are handled a little bit differently. We do have FSU affiliated organizations, for lack of maybe there's a better word, Challenger and Opening Nights, and the Museum of Fine Arts are grantees through COCA as state partners. On a side note, one of the most important things that COCA can help with is that we are a connector. And on our website, tallahasseearts.org, we have a section called Classifieds, and I'm going to write tallahasseearts.org. But what we do in our Classifieds newsletter is search. We are all over the place. We are grabbing grants. Like I'll probably grab Lindsey later and be like, Lindsey, put your stuff on the classifieds, and we make sure the DCA things are up to date. But we typically have 40 listings every week. They're not all funding, but we scour to get those for you. So if you'll sign up, again, if you go to tallahasseearts.org, the first prompt, it's going to sign up for newsletters. The Monday is events, Thursday is classifieds. The events are great, but y'all want to read the classifieds because I cannot tell you the amount of information we are churning through there. Not even in addition to grants, it's, you know, PPE and shuttered venues, stages. Like, we are really on it. I'm so proud of my team for, like, you know, having the most current information for you. So we try to get that out to you. And I know the DCA site has a lot of really great information as well, because sometimes we grab our info from their site. Thanks, Hillary. But that's basically our grant program. So I don't know how much it's going to directly affect you as individual artists, but definitely we can talk to you about your departments, other opportunities, and then also ways that we can help you market. Because it sounds like, you know, as part of these grant programs, you're going to have marketing initiatives to fulfill. I've got all kinds of tricks up my sleeves to make you guys look amazing. And nothing makes me happier than when someone reaches out to me and says, how can I get more exposure? Because I will give you, you know, help you with everything I know with how to get more exposure for your organization or department.
I'm wondering from each of you, what are some other ways that a humanities and arts researcher can make themselves stand out when they're looking for funding?
This is, I guess, really more of like just a general, I guess, tip for when you are writing your proposals. But I think that it's really important no matter who you're funding to. And I think that, you know, all of this is a good model because, like, I work, you know, with the local arts agencies. But then also, you know, both the Division of Cultural Affairs and the State Humanities, we have a parent organization that's a federal. So I think whether you're looking at public funds or you're looking at private funds, first, you know, you want to make sure that you're going like macro and micro, because there are, whether it's private foundations or public funds, there are resources. And so, you know, sometimes we have people where they might apply for us for this, but you know, they may have something later on that would be a better fit for one of the larger NEA, you know, projects. So I just, you know, suggest that people kind of keep that in mind as far as, you know, just being open and just making sure that when you are responding to those, you know, if it's a private foundation, they might have, you know, maybe it's just a letter of intent that you're sending to begin, but whatever they're asking for, most of those places are open. You know, they have program managers that are there. So it's our job to kind of onboard you to the system. So it really breaks my heart when I get to an eligibility review for someone who has filled out an application and I've never spoken to them before, and their application is lacking in things. They're not answering questions, and I feel like if I had just even like 15 minutes with them, we could have, or sometimes they're not even eligible, and I feel like, gosh, they spent all this time and this isn't really where they should be. So I would just really encourage you, whatever you're doing, to take the time to reach out to whoever is listed as the contact. You know, set up a one-on-one with them just to even have a conversation, let them know what you're doing. And it may be that your program isn't a fit for them, but they might have something else. You might have something else that would fit for what they're funding, or they might be able to recommend something else for you. So really just making sure that whatever you're doing and that when you're presenting your information, you know, I suggest that people keep some sort of like a file, you know, where you have kind of the same things that you'll need, like your artist statement and your resumes and those kind of things. But also specifically when you're in an application, you know, just make sure that what you're wanting from them is something that they fund, and that, you know, the expenses are appropriate, and just that when you're answering the questions, even if you feel like you're repeating yourself, that you're actually like looking at the prompt. It's almost like when you're in like 4th grade and you're writing an essay, but you kind of like, you can clean it up, but you know, whatever the question is, you know, and then, you know, making sure that it's in there, because, you know, as a panelist, when I do read somebody's application, and when you have, you know, 50 something applications and you're going through, they may have said that thing in another question, but like, I don't have time to go back and try to dig through. So if I have a rubric and I'm looking at something and I don't see what I need there in that prompt, you know, I'm just like, well, you know, got to move on. It's almost like when you apply for a job and you want your resume to look great, you know, somebody's going to be looking at this piece of paper and whatever you have, and that's what they're looking at. They don't know you. They don't know, you know, what you're capable of doing. And so you're conveying it in that application.
I totally agree with that. I've seen so many grants come through COCA and watch the process from, working with grantees and then watching the panelists. I think one of the most important things is to remember that you understand your program, you've got it, but this other person needs to really understand what you do in a snapshot. This also applies to your social media and your articles. This is the same thing. You have to pretend that they know nothing about you, and then you get to the meat of what it is and how it benefits the community right in that first impact statement. And I'm always surprised sometimes when I see material from organizations and they start getting into the nuts and bolts of it, but you have to explain who you are. And even though it seems really obvious to you, it's not obvious to everybody else.
Yeah, I just want to ditto everything that Hillary and Erica said. The same is true for us. I mentioned that 30% number of folks who are funded, and it's most oftentimes the people who communicated with me the most throughout the grant development process that are in that 30%. And it is so sad to see grant proposals come through that I had not heard about, like Hillary said, until we see it in the application process the day of. And it's a really good nugget of an idea, but it's just not quite there. And having 2 phone calls with me over the past month while they were writing it could have solved all that problem and got them the funding they needed quicker than possible. And I would just add to it too. I'm not sure if my peers here on the panel have the same, I'm sure they do the same opportunity, but if you are denied a grant, do reach back out to us and seek comments from the evaluators. We have a diverse evaluation panel, and they are incredibly talented in what they do and the knowledge that they have, and they provide very substantive comments to you that you can use then to reach out to me and have that conversation, but also weave in those comments when you're applying again if you are denied. And I would also say too, just make sure there are no typos, and organization is very important. And that is the key for everything.
So we have open panel because, government in the sunshine. So our panel meetings as agency are open. And, we started a long time ago because years ago in the last century, people would come up here and be here for days, and it was a big production. And so, for a long time, we've actually been they were teleconferences, and we had actually moved to the video platform, I think 2 years before, now everybody's comfortable with it. And you don't actually have to be seen, but, we have a screen that you can see the scores as they come in, and each application, when it comes up for review, you have an opportunity to give an update to the panel. And you're also there to answer any questions that they might have, which I've actually seen people, well, first of all, even though they're not supposed to, I've seen panelists deduct points before because people weren't there, because there's a fine line of this, it's like a stewardship thing. And so you're asking these people to entrust you with, a large amount of money. In our case, they're public funds. So there are things that you do that kind of builds that confidence. And so one of those things in our case is the participation in the meeting, but it also gives you the opportunity, if there's something that they don't understand or they have a question, you can respond and, give them information. And I've seen people's scores go up from that. So if you are in a situation where the funder allows you to participate, certainly do that. And then in addition to that, we do, provide the written comments as well, and the meetings are recorded and all that.
And I actually just wanted to launch off something Erica said too. Just one final comment from me on this is, she made the comment, make sure you're writing for an audience that understands you, which is 100% true. You really want to make it as plain as possible. Think about writing it for a 6th or 7th grade audience. And I've seen a lot of university professors who are incredibly talented and knowledgeable in their field get panelists rather confused on the jargon and the technical terms they use to describe their project they want to do. That's more writing for an academic journal than it is for a grant proposal. Because specifically for our grant program, you are asking funds for public programming. So to use jargon-laden paragraphs that leave us scratching our heads, even if we got a degree in the field you're writing from, doesn't persuade us that your project is really going to be for the general public.
I would like to ask something that I think you may have touched on a bit, but if there are other things more specific to this route that you'd like to dive into, let me know. So oftentimes arts and humanities funding, unlike other types of funding, can seem like a very small pie, and there's a lot of competition for each small slice. Is that how your organizations feel about arts and humanities funding. Is that the actual reality, or is it not? And how do you handle that perception?
So ours is kind of, I mean, special in that because we do, you know, before when we had a grants trust. So we used to get corporation filing fees that went into a grants trust. We had a certain amount of money every year. We knew, we divvied it up, and then we said, okay, we have this much, you know, here we go. So when we switched to the other way, where now we have this list that goes above the legislature, it's kind of like there are pros and cons to it. But one of the things that I tell people, so part of advocating is actually submitting the application, because the more people we have that are applying, you know, we can go, and it does, that number, you know, starts to get really big, you know, it gets in like the 60 millions, but it tells our representatives that, you know, this is the need that we have. And we actually just did a grants task force where we looked at kind of what we were reaching, and based on, I think it was like the numbers of organizations that self-identify as arts and culture through Dun and Bradstreet, I think it was like, I don't know, we're a very low percentage that we're reaching. So we're actually in the process of kind of, and some of them totally don't exist anymore or aren't, you know, don't do any programming, but, you know, there is a limit. And even in the counties, you know, there's only so many counties that we were reaching when I actually did a heat map and looked at where our grants are concentrated. Obviously, you know, Miami, Palm Beach. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is find ways to get into all the counties. So like when we look at the artist funding and we're opening up, you know, teaching artists to where individuals can apply to go into schools and do arts integration practice. So some of those areas that we're not reaching necessarily with organizations, you know, if everybody doesn't have the capacity to have an organization, you know, there's individuals that can come in and get that. So for us, when you talk to the legislature, you know, those representatives, they want to come down to like, okay, what's in my district? What does it take for me? So like one of the guys that's over appropriations, the very last one this year on our specific cultural project grants is his county. So we're like, okay, well, you need this much to get them funded. And then they look at things like, you know, what's the per capita in Florida? And, you know, we at one time, you know, we were really, really high, and then we were really, really low. So sometimes they're motivated, you know, by things like that. So in the case of us, you know, if you don't apply, then people don't know that it's needed. And so that part of that advocacy is that first applying. And then, you know, people, if there is somewhere that you're going and they realize that there's more of a need, you know, I think that they would be more apt to kind of try to expand to reach the need, if that makes sense.
In terms of whether or not $5,000 in a grant is considered a small piece of a pie, and when all said and done, I think for us it really partly depends on how large your project is. If you are operating a $50,000 massive project and, you know, a $5,000 grant with, of course, obvious grant final reporting, getting registered in sam.gov, all that stuff is cumbersome. That is something to consider. However, though, getting a grant from Florida Humanities is really, in a sense, a stamp of approval that this is a humanities, you know, worthy program that we support across the state. And I will say, I've heard from the National Endowment for the Humanities, they do look favorably upon that. If you have never applied for a grant from the NEH before and you seek one, I've heard them recommend, well, maybe you should go through the State Humanities Council and apply for funding there. I'd also say too, I did not mention this in the in my little introduction, but our grants are 1 year. So they are really chewable and easy to get through and to manage, and we make it very user-friendly with the online application system. And a benefit too of being a nonprofit is that we're able to get the funds in the hands of applicants rather quickly, because our funding actually comes from the NEH. And I'll just use the example of the January 13th deadline that passed. We received a pool of applicants, and they will know March 1, so not even 2 months later, if they are awarded, and they'll be able to request 90% of their award as soon as they sign their grant contract and get registered in sam.gov. So if you apply for funding, you could have the funding in hand within 2.5 or 3 months to complete your project. So it is a little bit more speedy. So I would say that plus the stamp of approval makes it less of a small piece of a pie and more a little bit more chewable.
There's a question in the chat box that asks about some examples of what is a project and what does not qualify as a project. So, well, so for us, a project, And we have two differentiations. First of all, so we have some organizations that are eligible for what we call operating support. That's a percentage of your operating budget. And that definition that Erica gave earlier about the state partners, that's kind of our definition too. So if you're an organization who, for all intents and purposes, you could be your own 501c3 or even, have your own FEIN number, but you fall under university. So the museum is an example, opening nights is an example. They have their own board, they have a segregated budget. They could fulfill all of the requirements for general operating support on their own, but they fall under the umbrella of the university. So those are our special, and we call them multi-purpose institutions. So projects typically are not your operating budget. So it would be some sort of a project or a program. So like a section of a budget. So in our case, we have all kinds of things. And so under the artist funding, which is where we fund individuals, those are Florida resident artists who are presenting original works of art. So in that case, we've had everything from, playwrights who have been done, Ben Gunter was an example of that. I had an artist in Palm Beach that did a major exhibition and then did a publication. I had another artist that did, a series of installations that then resulted in a publication, things like that. But again, it's also not, so if you were a section of the university, it wouldn't be your whole budget. It would be, a part of it, and it would be some sort of, and it has to be something that involves the public. So even with our artist funding, years ago when we had fellowships and we would give you $5,000, we would just say your art's good, here's $5,000. We don't do that anymore. So there has to be some sort of public component. So it's not just like we're giving you money and you're in your studio making work. There's some way that you're engaging the public and they're able to experience the work that you're doing.
And I'll answer that too, so I think it was directed to both of us. We also have to have projects that are for the general public with an emphasis on making sure you are including underserved communities. That is a very high priority for us, as I'm sure that as well as my peers. They also have to involve humanities scholars, and a few other line items that are on our website, but some specific examples of the types of projects we fund would be exhibits, whether history exhibits or humanities exhibits in some capacity that bring in scholars to engage the public in those themes that are inside the exhibit. Perhaps it's about racial inequality, the exhibit is. Then you would bring in expert scholars in the humanities fields, whether it's a professor of history, professor of anthropology, professor of political science, and then have public lectures or programs that dive into those disciplines and topics and engage the public, have a live Q&A, and really enable people to have that aha moment. Other things would be lectures, podcasts, radio segments, oral history projects that then present those oral histories to the community and again, foster that constructive dialogue on it with humanities scholars like a qualified oral historian. Some things that are not qualified as projects, I would say we cannot fund live performances like funding ballets, funding musical performances we cannot do, because again, that is more of the National Endowment for the Arts and Arts Councils, and we are the Humanities Council. So that's a little bit of the difference between the two of us.
Well, and so what you could do is you could get funding from us if you were doing a performance or something. We could actually fund that program for. So we could be funding like your artist fees, we could be doing marketing, things like that. And then you could match us with money from Lindsey that could fund, some sort of panel discussion with humanities scholars to kind of create more depth to the performance.
Absolutely.
And then when you've gotten that money, you're going to contact Erica at TallahasseeArts.org, and then she will help you get your information on the calendar. So it goes to our newsletter to 13,000 people. We have got all kinds of ways for you to help promote that are free. If you want to spend money with me, you can do that too, but we've got lots of free ways. So that is how your local arts council can help carry that forward, and you'll need that in your grant reporting. And I just want to mention that COCA's funds, we will fund a whole years of programming. So we're not really project grants, it would be your program. So we would fund like a whole season of events, especially with our cultural grant. And so that your program can be your season, which is really nice. It's as close to a general operating grant as you can get. The caveat is that because these are funded by tourism development, you have to keep an eye on, is your programming tourism related, and how do you demonstrate that it is tourism related or driving tourism. I will note that this year, interestingly enough, we have been allowed to use virtual programming to fulfill tourism requirements as long as there's a call to action in the virtual event. So that's pretty exciting. We're making some noise. We're really trying to make some noise. So again, that's the other reason I ask all of you that have programs or lectures or anything that is arts related. And I have a very broad view of arts. Like if you've got music at your event, bring it. But the more that collectively as a community we can shape the perception and what we think the reality, that this is an arts community, that all of us working together creates the reality, and we all really need that. So I'm just encouraging you, if you want a pep talk on how to be a marketer, even if you're like, I don't know how to do this, I will help you.
And I don't think there's been a lot of questions about cost share for grants, but maybe I'll talk about that and see if that spurs any questions. We do require at least a 1-to-1 cost share for our grants. So if you're applying for $5,000, you have to show at least $5,000 in match. That can be either in kind, that is donated services, or cash. If you receive a grant from DCA, that could be considered a helpful cost share there. But while there is only a 1-to-1 match, we do ask that you record all eligible cost share, because like Hillary was saying, that helps in our advocacy efforts to say, wow, $5,000 goes a long way in the community, and these dollars really make a difference economically. So if you have any specific questions about cost share, or if you consider yourself a cost share novice, all questions are acceptable, and don't be embarrassed, and we are all here to help.
And we also require a match. So ours is a little bit different. If you are an organization, so if you applied through the department or in conjunction with a nonprofit, that would be a dollar for dollar match or cost share. However, up to half of that match could be in kind. So for example, if you got a $25,000 grant, you would need to show another $25,000 in your expenses, but half of those could be just the value of donated goods and services, and then half of those would need to be actual cash expenditures. Now, with the individual funding, so for the artist projects, that follows our underserved match model, which is a 50% match, and it can be 100% in kind, or it can be cash, or any combination of those. So if you got $25,000 through that, it would be a $12,500 match of either. And so an example might be, if you were doing an exhibition and you printed a catalog and you got someone to donate part of the cost of the printing of the catalog, you know, you would put the value of that. If you wanted to donate some of your time, so like for artist projects, sometimes they will include an artist fee, so they will invoice that. But let's say, you know, using a reasonable, you know, standard rate of value, but if it would usually be $5,000 for you to get this choreographer, and they're willing to do it for $2,500 and then donate $2,500, you know, that's something like that. And the main thing with that, you kind of keep track of that, but usually you want to make sure that you have some sort of like letter of agreement or understanding with the person, and then that they acknowledge the amount that they're donating to you.
COCA allows you to put 15% additional in kind toward your budget. I'm not sure if that will be the same this year, but we don't have a match. I'm anticipating that there may be changes to our program. I mean, just with it, we review everything every year. One thing I will say is that every year there's an opportunity for both the panelists and the grantees to complete a survey, which is anonymous. Usually we can tell who it is because they list their name, but they can have a feedback. And then we have several meetings in which people can discuss it. And so it's kind of a living program where we do take input from the community. And we've made many changes over the years. I will say that one thing that is being discussed or I've seen mentioned in our grants this year in the reporting is, how are you addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion? Obviously, everybody is talking about that. So that and, you know, reaching underserved communities is something that people bring up. And I mean, I I think everyone probably agrees with me and on the panel that this is definitely something being looked at as we move forward. And again, COCA can help you. I mean, this is where we're sort of like a chamber of the arts. If you're like, hey, I've got this project, but I need to connect to somebody else, who would you talk to? I want to have music at my events. What musicians can I hire? Or can I have somebody do a mural? Let us know. We love to be matchmakers. I would say Yenta, but I don't know how many of you would. I'm kind of an arts Yenta. So if you don't know Yiddish, you can look that up.
And kind of like the way we're the state, because I do coordinate and work with all the local arts agencies. So like local arts agencies are the county local version of what we do. And so they are, like the stewards of arts and culture for their community. And so depending on the community, that sometimes they're funders, sometimes they're not, sometimes they have programming, sometimes they don't. I mean, it's kind of an organic thing that comes out of both the needs and the resources of the community. But so again, they're really like our boots on the ground. So I do encourage, and if you're not always in Tallahassee, but you go somewhere else, when you're finished or whatever, that's always a good way for you to start by kind of hooking up with your local arts agency.
And I would say too, there's a myth that grantors can be rather intimidating because there's that, check system, there's that barrier, but we are people just like you, and we're actually in the business because we truly love supporting these awesome projects. So we love having these conversations with you and seeing what kind of work you are doing in the community. So always feel like there's an open door relationship in that way.
And a lot of times we've written, grants before too. So, I mean, we can commiserate.
I know this can be a daunting thing to do, especially for those of us who are new to grant writing or submitting grants. And also it can be intimidating sometimes. I feel like one thing that has been wonderful about today is I think we're all feeling much less intimidated. And it's great to put faces to names here in these organizations and hear that you are people just like us who are passionate about arts and humanities and are here to help people succeed.